Imagine walking into a car dealership, ready to make a purchase, only to realize the man behind the desk is more than just a salesman, he's the CEO. That's exactly what happened when an undercover CEO decided to test his own business from the ground up. What started as a simple visit to buy a new car quickly turned into something much more intense. While casually browsing the lot, the CEO overhears a conversation between two customers that stops him in his tracks. The words they say are so unexpected, they force him to rethink everything. What do these customers know about the dealership that he doesn't? And how will this moment change his perspective on his company? Stick around as we dive deeper into the twist that caught the CEO off guard and left us all questioning what happens next. You won't want to miss what happens after this shocking reveal. The CEO, whose name we'll call Jake, had always believed his dealership was top-notch. He'd invested countless hours and money to ensure every detail was perfect, from the sales process to customer service. But as he stood there, quietly listening to the two customers behind him, doubt began to creep in. They were discussing their frustrations with the dealership, complaints about hidden fees, poor service, and even questionable business practices. For a moment, Jake felt like he was hearing a different story about his own company, one he hadn't imagined in his wildest dreams. How had things gotten to this point without him noticing? The weight of their words hung in the air, and Jake knew he had to know more. But he couldn't reveal his true identity just yet. The question now was, how far was he willing to go to uncover the truth? The next few moments would change everything. Jake's mind raced as he tried to process the conversation. Every word the customer spoke felt like a direct hit to his pride. He had worked so hard to build a reputation for his dealership, but now he was hearing first-hand complaints he never expected. The first customer, a middle-aged man named Carl, was explaining how he'd been pressured into unnecessary add-ons, things he hadn't asked for but were recommended by the sales team. The second, a younger woman named Mia, was telling her story about a repair that had been promised on her car but never delivered. She had been strung along for weeks, left in the dark with no answers. As the words sunk in, Jake felt a mix of anger and disbelief. His team was supposed to be the best. What had gone wrong? He needed answers, but exposing himself now would be a disaster. He wondered if he could solve this without revealing his identity. But could he trust anyone on his staff anymore? His mind began to spiral. What if this was just the tip of the iceberg? What else was going on behind closed doors that he had no idea about? Jake's internal conflict deepened as he watched Carl and Mia leave the dealership, unaware that the man they had just spoken to was their CEO. He had a decision to make: confront his team, or risk everything he had built. Both paths seemed dangerous, and the clock was ticking. The tension between the desire to protect his business and the need to face the truth was almost unbearable. Jake couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over him. Every step he took around the dealership felt heavier, more deliberate, as if the walls were closing in. He needed answers, but the fear of what he might uncover made him hesitate. The last thing he wanted was to destroy the very thing he had spent years building, but the way Carl and Mia had spoken, it was clear something was wrong beneath the surface. They had no idea who he really was, but Jake knew it couldn't stay that way for long. The tension in the air was palpable as he watched his staff go about their work. He saw Mark, one of his top salesmen, chatting with another customer. Was Mark the one pressuring clients into those extra costs, or was he just a pawn in a much bigger game? Jake's gut told him there was more to the story, but it wasn't just Mark. His entire team had been so friendly, so trustworthy, at least, that's what Jake had believed. What if they were all complicit in this system? It was getting late, but Jake couldn't leave. Not yet. He slipped into the back office to gather his thoughts, hoping for some clarity. His mind was spinning, going over everything: the hidden fees, the false promises, the way customers seemed to feel taken advantage of. His employees had always seemed like a close-knit group, but how well did he really know them? As he sat there, wondering how deep the betrayal might go, The phone on his desk buzzed. It was a message from one of his managers, Katie, asking if she could speak with him privately. Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was she going to confess something? Or was she just another piece of the puzzle he didn't want to face? With a deep breath, he stood up, preparing himself for whatever was about to unfold. He didn't know what he'd hear, but the thought of not knowing was worse than anything else. This could be the moment that shattered everything. His reputation, his trust in his team, even his future at the dealership. He was about to find out just how bad it had really gotten. Jake walked into the break room where Katie was waiting, her face tense, as if she had been stewing over something for hours. As soon as the door clicked shut behind him, she stood up, looking like she was on the verge of breaking down. Jake's instincts screamed that something was off. This wasn't a casual conversation. "I don't know how to say this, but I can't keep quiet anymore," Katie began, her voice shaking. "There's been something going on at this dealership, something you won't want to hear." Jake's pulse quickened and his mind raced. Was this the confession he'd been waiting for? Had she seen the same issues he was starting to uncover? But then Katie's next words knocked the wind out of him. "It's not just the sales team," she continued, looking around as if she was afraid someone might be listening. "It's you. Your management decisions, your blind spots, they've made the whole thing worse. People are getting taken advantage of, yes, but it's not just because of what they're doing out there. It's because of what's happening behind the scenes. The numbers are being manipulated." Jake froze. Manipulated. His mind flashed back to all the reports he'd reviewed, all the deals he'd approved, thinking everything was running smoothly. But what if, in his drive for success, he'd missed something bigger? Katie lowered her voice even further. "I wasn't going to say anything, but you need to know. It's higher up than just the sales floor. Someone is making those decisions, and it's affecting everything, from the cars we're bringing in to the way we're pricing them." Jake's world tilted. He had built this company, but now it felt like the foundation was crumbling beneath him. Who could be behind this? Was it one of his trusted managers, or someone even higher up the chain? As the weight of her words settled in, Jake's stomach turned. This wasn't just about customer complaints anymore. This was about trust, loyalty, and the future of his entire business. But who could he trust now? Was there anyone left who wasn't involved? Katie's eyes met his, searching for a reaction, but Jake couldn't answer. He couldn't even think straight. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, and he realized that he had just taken the first step into a much darker web than he could have imagined. This was no longer just about fixing problems. It was about survival. Jake stood motionless, trying to process what Katie had just told him. His thoughts felt scattered, but one thing was clear. There was more to this than a few bad decisions or rogue employees. Someone, maybe even someone close to him, had been pulling strings behind the scenes, manipulating everything to serve their own interests. His heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't ignore this any longer. "I'm going to fix this," Jake said finally, his voice sharp. Katie gave him a concerned look but nodded. Jake's first move was to call a company-wide meeting the next morning. He couldn't let this fester any longer. Everyone had to know the truth, and more importantly, he had to find the person who was betraying his trust. The room was packed with employees, all staring at him with a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. He stood in front of them, every ounce of his energy focused on not revealing his panic. "I know there have been complaints, serious ones," he began, "and I know some of you have seen things that shouldn't have happened under my watch. But the truth is, I didn't know. I didn't want to know." Jake took a deep breath. "And for that, I'm sorry. I'm here to make things right, and I'm going to hold accountable anyone responsible for the actions that have hurt our customers and this company." As he spoke, he could see the tension in the room rise. Some faces were relieved, others uncomfortable. Then, just as Jake was about to reveal that an investigation would take place, the doors burst open. Mark, one of his most trusted managers, stormed in, a grim expression on his face. "I know what you're doing, Jake," Mark said, his voice low but firm. "But you're looking in the wrong direction. It's not what you think." Jake's stomach dropped. Mark had been the one he trusted the most. He'd always had his back. But now, his tone suggested something else entirely. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, trying to stay calm.